Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. We are glad to have you with us. UUCS is a welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique background, beliefs, lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members or have been here for a short time, or if you're joining us today for the very first time, we're delighted to have you. We also want to welcome those of you who are watching through the live stream channel over the internet, hopefully. It is our mission to join together to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world. Or in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. I am your lay leader today, Lisa Conger, and with me this morning is our guest speaker, the Reverend UU Minister, the Reverend Barry Andrews, and I will more formally introduce him before his sermon. But before we continue, Jerry White has a few words to share.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning. The Generosity team, specifically Cindy Phillips, asked me to speak in support of their 7-week campaign to raise money to fund the operation of this church for next year, July 2018 to the end of June 2019. I suspect she asked me because I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. While I had trepidations when asked, I am nonetheless happy and excited to be here to tell you why personally why I think we all should give generously to the support of our church. Being on the Board of Trustees, I have the opportunity to watch as the budget for next year is being developed. The board is the next to the last step in the budget formation. That is, we put our stamp of approval on the many, many people's work on it before it goes to you, the congregation, for final approval. The board members will have a table in the fellowship hall for about 6 weeks prior to the annual meeting in June, when you will then vote on the budget. In preparation for this past Wednesday evening, the Board of Trustees went through the budget line by line to understand why some items have increased and why some items have decreased. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that our church is going through considerable growth. The current Path to Membership class has something like 30 people in it, and those Path to Membership classes are held twice a year. So it stands to reason that the budget is growing. And so here are some of the reasons that Linda and I are supporting our church with an increased pledge. First, one of the strongest, most significant and vibrant progressive voices in our community is our church. And so my pledge puts my values into action. Secondly, it provides a friendly, welcoming community. We are all creatures, social creatures, and even the most introverted among us is happy when they are in our fellowship hall. Third, it's true. They might not make eye contact. Third, it's because we're being asked by a very hardworking generosity team. Now, I have a huge amount of respect for our staff and the many volunteers because of the very realistic approach they bring to matching the Board of Trustees' priorities and the strategic planning that's been going on the past several years. I've been here quite a while, and not all budgets are constructed in a realistic way. But I see no miserly or pie-in-the-sky approach so far this year. It's a good, realistic budget. Fourth, it feels good. It's true. Whenever you've taken the time from your busy day-to-day, your busy schedule to visit a friend or someone who is lonely or suffering from illness, or even worse, from impending death, you always feel better. Finally, I support the church because of Todd Eckloff. We are very lucky to have such a wise and caring minister. Some of the older members in this church know that it hasn't always been so. And so, in the spirit of the Unitarian Universalist second principle, I implore you to join me, insofar as possible, to increase your pledge in these dramatically changing times, so that we can increase justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Now, please take a few minutes to greet one another and be sure to extend a hand of friendship to someone you haven't met yet. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have more time to visit with one another following the service, where we can share coffee and conversation. All right. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world, and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it has been found. Our opening words this morning is my poem, The Poet's Song, which is, I think, reflective of the spirit of the Transcendentalists' love of nature and the spirit of self-reliance. The Poet's Song. When I had no roof, I made wonder my roof. When I had no walls, I made nature my home. When I had no doorway, I made truth my doorway. When I had no light, I made a lantern of my heart. When I was thirsty, I drank in possibility. When I was hungry, I feasted on awe. When I had no companion, I made solitude my friend. When I had no company, I opened my library of books. When I have no playmate, I turn to the sea, waving to me. When I have no lover, I whisper secrets to the moon, my beloved confidant. When I have no temple, my pen and paper become my prayer, and all that I encounter holy.
Well, today we are also singing the words of Transcendentalist poet and writers. The first one that we started with was from Emerson, and the next one we're doing, number 12, "O Life That Maketh All Things New," is from Samuel Longfellow, who was the brother of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So please stand as you're willing and able to sing number 12, "O Life That Maketh All Things New."
Could I have all the children or the young at heart come up, please? I know we have some out there. Very good, very good, very good. Oh, this is a great group. You want to sit on the floor? You want to sit on a chair? It's up to you. Yay. That's wonderful. The book that I'm reading today is called All the World, and it's by Liz Garton Scanlon. And this book is dedicated to the wonderful children who made such a statement yesterday.
Yes.
Rock, stone, pebble, sand, body, shoulder, arm, hand, a moat to dig, a shell to keep, all the world is wide and deep. Hive, bee, wings, hum, husk, cob, corn, yum, tomato blossom, fruit so red, all the world's a garden bed. You're so good. You're such good listeners. Tree, trunk, branch, crown, climbing up and sitting down, morning sun becomes noon blue. All the world is old and new. road, street, track, path, ship, boat, wooden raft, nest, bird, feather, fly, all the world has got its sky. Slip, trip, stumble, fall. Tip the bucket, spill it all. Better luck another day. All the world goes round this way. Table, bowl, cup, spoon, hungry tummy, supper soon, butter, flour, big black pot. All the world is cold and hot. Spreading shadows, setting sun, crickets, curtains, day is done. A fire takes away the chill. All the world can hold quite still. Nanas, papas, cousins, kin, piano, harp, and violin. Babies passed from neck to knee. All the world is you and me. Everything you hear, smell, see, all the world is everything. Everything is you and me. Hope and peace and love and trust. All the world is all of us. You are all the world right there. Thank you for listening so well. Let's sing our children out.
We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world. Thank you, Michaelina. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We kindle light this morning in honor of the youth leaders who are invigorating and inspiring the movement for school safety and responsible gun control with their articulate bravery and passion. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing.
Myrna's mother.
Those named aloud and those remembered in the silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. As we move into our time of meditation, please find a receptive posture, close your eyes if you wish, and take a couple of deepening breaths. We will begin this time with a quotation from Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the Transcendentalists, and then move into silence. What lies behind you and what lies in front of you pales in comparison to what lies inside of you.
As Debbie said, a number of the hymns in our songbook are compositions by Transcendentalist poets, and there are a number of readings in the back also that are contributions of our Transcendentalist forebears, including one that I would invite you to read with me responsively. It's number 575 there in the back. This is from the writing of Margaret Fuller, whose book Woman in the 19th Century was really the first feminist manifesto written by an American author. A new manifestation is at hand, a new hour is come.
When man and woman regard one another as brother and sister, they will both to appreciate and prophesy to one another.
A new manifestation is at hand, a new hour is come.
What woman needs is not as a woman to act or rule, but as a nature to grow, as an intelligence to discern, as a soul to live freely and unimpeded, to unfold such powers as were given her.
A new manifestation is at hand, a new hour is come.
Man does not have his fair share either. His energies are repressed and distorted by the intimidation of racial obstacles.
A new manifestation is at hand, a new hour is come.
We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every pathway open to woman as freely as to man.
Were this done, we believe a divine energy would pervade nature to a degree unknown in the history of former ages.
The new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
As one who is inspired by nature and my spirituality lies there, I always have felt close to the Transcendentalists and their connection between the living earth and its spiritual body. I'm going to sing you a little song by Max Kapp, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea, which has those tremendous ideas inside it. I brought my spirit to the sea. I stood upon the shore. I gazed upon infinity. I heard the waters roar. And then there came a sense of peace. Some whisper calmed my soul. Some ancient ministry of stars had made my spirit whole. I brought my spirit to the trees that loomed against the sky. I touched each wandering errant breeze to know if God were nigh. And then I felt an inner flame that fiercely burned my tears. Upright I rose from bended knee to meet the asking years.
Thank you, Deborah. It is now my pleasure to welcome Reverend Barry Andrews to this church. Reverend Andrews is a minister emeritus of the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock on Long Island, New York. He discovered Unitarianism at the Spokane Unitarian Church in 1963 as a high school student and served the Spokane congregation as religious educator and associate minister between 1976 and 1987. He has written books on and edited anthologies of Transcendentalist writers, including Emerson, Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller. His latest book is Transcendentalism and the Cultivation of the Soul, published by the University of Massachusetts Press. Copies of his work will be available at the back of the Friendship Hall following our service. Barry and his wife Linda are currently living on Bainbridge Island. We welcome Barry.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that generous introduction. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be with you again after some period of time. As Lisa mentioned, I first became a Unitarian in this congregation 55 years ago, and for 25 years I was a member here. My wife and I raised our two children in the religious education program, and we have very fond memories of the time that we spent with you. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. And though you may not know it, I'm preaching to a full house today. Because it's not only those of you who are here in person, but it's that great cloud of witnesses that over so many years enriched the life of this congregation. And it's a pleasure for me to be at this pulpit again, where I preached from time to time. It reminds me of the two ministers who were my mentors and role models, Rudy Gilbert and Bill Hauff. And it was in fact Rudy who first introduced me to Ralph Waldo Emerson and set me on the path to read and write about Emerson, Thoreau, and the Transcendentalists, religious radicals within the Unitarian tradition, responsible for many reforms in our theology, polity, and worship. My remarks today are taken from my most recent book, Transcendentalism and the Cultivation of the Soul. Even though I now live in the Pacific Northwest, I still try to make a visit to Walden Pond at least once a year. And when I do, I make a point of hiking to the site of Henry David Thoreau's cabin there. On one occasion a few years ago, I saw a middle-aged man sitting quietly on the cairn, a pile of stones near where the cabin once stood. I asked him what brought him there. He said Walden changed his life. He had spent over 20 years in prison for various offenses, he said, including theft and drug possession. He had a teacher in prison once who taught a class on literature, including Thoreau's Walden. The teacher brought the class to visit Walden Pond on an outing. The book and that visit changed his life. Believing, as Thoreau wrote, there is more day to dawn, he straightened out his life. Now he was clean, he was married, and he had a good job. He'd come back to the pond to reflect on his life and the new course it had taken. I've been reading, reflecting on, speaking, and writing about the Transcendentalists for most of my career as a minister. I'm often asked what fires my passion, and this passage from Walden comes most readily to mind. There are probably words addressed to our condition exactly, which, if we could really hear and understand, would be more salutary than the morning or the spring to our lives, and possibly put a new aspect on the face of things for us. Those questions that disturbed, puzzled, and confound us have, in their turn, occurred to all the wise men. Not one has been omitted, and each has answered them according to his ability by his words and his life. Now, what Thoreau is saying in his 19th century way is that humans have always struggled with life's fundamental questions. Why do we live and die? What are we here for? How should we live? If we seek out the wise thinkers of the past, we are sure to find answers that will inspire us to live more healthfully and joyfully today. That is how I have experienced the words and lives of the Transcendentalists. Although Transcendentalism is often viewed as a literary movement that flourished in the middle decades of the 19th century, it is more accurately described as a religious one. It emerged from New England Unitarianism in reaction to Christian theology of the time. The Transcendentalists thought of their lectures and essays as a kind of modern-day scripture, not as accepted truths, but as a record of each writer's spiritual experience. They believed, as Emerson did, that what was true for us in our most elevated moments might also be universally true. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius, Emerson boldly stated. Their writing is a form of wisdom literature, similar to that of Lao Tzu, Rumi, Marcus Aurelius, and other philosophers and religious figures who wrote about their own experiences in their own time. The Transcendentalists offer scholars much to study, but everyday readers have even more to gain, I believe, by mining their words and lives for answers to the perennial questions of human existence. I see them as living voices whose writing is addressed as much today as it was in their time to spiritual seekers and religious radicals like themselves. Restless souls, as religious historian Lee Eric Schmidt describes them. The Transcendentalists were in fact the forerunners of what Schmidt calls the spiritual left in America. Their thought has widely influenced American culture today. Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience guided the actions of Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and many of today's social activists. His reverence for and observations of nature gave rise to the environmental movement and continue to inspire efforts to preserve wilderness areas and combat climate change. Emerson's insistence in his Divinity School address that religious truth is grounded in personal experience influenced the thinking of William James and succeeding generations of spiritual seekers. Margaret Fuller's book, Woman in the 19th Century, sparked a feminist movement that continues to have a profound impact on American society. Almost all of the Transcendentalists were Unitarians, and many of them were ministers at some point in their lives. Yet, in contemporary Unitarian Universalist congregations, there is little awareness of the extent to which they influenced the historical development of Unitarian worship and theology. Historian David Robson, himself a Unitarian Universalist, observes, like a pauper who searches for the next meal, never knowing of the relatives whose will would make him rich, American Unitarians lament their vague religious identity, standing upon the richest theological legacy of any American denomination. Possessed of a deep and sustaining history of spiritual achievement and philosophical speculation, religious liberals have been, ironically, dispossessed of that heritage. This could be said of religious liberals in general, including many who do not consider themselves religious in the conventional sense of the term. Today, many Americans are experiencing a hunger for an inner life of greater richness and depth, abandoning the exclusive claims and moral correctness of conservative Christianity in search of new sources of inspiration. Many have found wisdom in other seemingly more spiritual traditions, such as Buddhism, Vedanta, Sufism, goddess religion, and paganism. The Transcendentalists were actually the first generation of Americans to look for spiritual inspiration in faith traditions outside their own, clearing the path for future seekers. Today's restless souls, I believe, will discover hidden treasures in Transcendentalism, a uniquely and authentically American form of spirituality. We live in a transition period, Emerson noted. The stern old faiths have all pulverized. 'Tis a whole population of gentlemen and ladies out in search of religions. In his view, this spiritual hunger could no longer be satisfied by adhering to church doctrine and discipline, but only by embracing a wider spirituality. God, he said, builds his temple in the heart on the ruins of churches and religions. Although the Transcendentalists introduced the distinction between religion and spirituality, their quarrel was not with churches and religions per se, but with the theological and social conservatism of Christian churches of their day, Unitarian churches included. Some traded their pulpits for a podium on the lecture circuit. Others remained in the ministry, reforming worship and congregational life. The remedy for a decaying church, Emerson famously declared in his Divinity School address, is first soul, second soul, and evermore soul. The soul and its cultivation were the primary preoccupations of the Transcendentalists in everything they said and did, from the pursuit of self-reliance to social reform. Self-culture was the defining characteristic of the age, a term widely used to refer to education and self-improvement. It took on special meaning for the Transcendentalists. They believed, as Emerson put it, that every man should be open to ecstasy or a divine illumination, and his daily walk elevated by intercourse with the spiritual world. They experienced such ecstasies themselves and considered them to be the spiritual high water marks of their lives. They sought ways of cultivating such experiences and incorporating insights gained through them into the texture of their everyday lives. Self-culture, as they understood it, was a form of spiritual practice intended to accomplish these aims. Moreover, the work of self-culture did not end with the individual. The self in question was not the isolated individual ego, but rather the human soul in its relation to the universal mind, or as Emerson termed it, the oversoul. Their notion of self-culture thus links mysticism and social action. The belief that human beings are interconnected with one another and with all of nature led its adherents into the world more often than away from it, insists Emerson biographer Robert Richardson. The Transcendentalists were not radical individualists aloof from politics and society, as is sometimes alleged, but were rather more activist than many of their Unitarian and Trinitarian opponents. According to Richardson, they found that the ethical consequences of transcendental idealism impelled them into social, political, educational, and religious reform. They firmly believed that individual transformation necessarily resulted in social change and that reform was ineffective without it. Now, the Transcendentalists were the first to admit that they were not a unified party. In the words of James Freeman Clarke, one of the movement's original members, they called themselves the Club of the Like-Minded, I suppose because no two of us thought alike. They pursued a wide variety of avenues and interests. Collectively, however, they adhered to a set of common spiritual principles. Their spirituality was very much in this world, characterized by a reverence for nature, an organic worldview, a sense of the miraculous in everyday life, an optimism about human potential, a search for what is universal in religion and human experience, a strong moral conscience, and an encouragement of the individual in her or his own religious quest. Their practices to achieve self-culture, some formal, others informal, all aim to transform both self and society. Starting as a religious revolt, Transcendentalism soon became a broad-based reform movement as members of the group sought to realize the ethical implications of their philosophical idealism. Because they believed that the religious impulse was innate and universal, they looked for common elements in the world's spiritual traditions, embracing an unprecedented religious cosmopolitanism. No one knows who coined the term, but the Transcendentalists took their name from the occasional meetings of a group of young ministers and intellectuals, Unitarians mostly, who gathered to discuss the state of the churches and society at large. The so-called Transcendental Club met nearly 30 times over a 4-year period, beginning in 1836. Upwards of 50 men and women attended some or most of these meetings. As noted, their interests varied. Some of them pursued literary careers, others practiced ministry. Most were engaged in a variety of reforms, some more ardently than others. Many excellent scholars have studied and written about Transcendentalism and the Transcendentalists. Most of them focus on a rather limited period of the movement's literary productivity and subsequent influence. While I draw heavily on these resources, I write primarily as someone whose personal and professional life had been greatly enriched by the teachings of the Transcendentalists. I believe they are not relics of the past, but prophetic voices with a spiritual message that speaks clearly to us today. The old faiths that have comforted nations seem to have spent their force, Emerson observed. Yet in the face of skepticism and religious decline, he continued to believe that the religious sentiment was an essential aspect of human nature, and that the answer to a bad religion is a better one through the cultivation of the soul. There is always some religion, he said, some hope and fear extended into the invisible, from the blind boating which nails a horseshoe to the mast or the threshold, up to the song of the elders of the apocalypse. But the religion cannot rise above the state of the votary. The important question is, what are the means by which the votary, or would-be follower, is elevated? The Transcendentalists sought to elevate the votary by means of a discipline that included solitude, contemplation, walks in nature, simple living, reading, conversation, and journal keeping. They pursued these practices not for health or financial reward, but for self-culture, or the cultivation of the soul. Self-culture is as important today as ever, and is as authentic and rewarding as any other form of spiritual practice. And many of the restless souls who have attended my classes over the years have been surprised to discover that the spiritual practices they were looking for were ones that they already followed, albeit in an informal way. Now, we often think of spiritual disciplines as requiring devoted practice, daily prayer, meditation, yoga, and the like. Many of these ancient religious practices were developed to focus the mind, purify the body, and transcend the ego with the goal of achieving enlightenment and peace of mind. In comparison, the Transcendentalist spiritual practices might seem quite tame. They weren't monks, yogis, or ascetics. They probably didn't even view their practices as an explicitly spiritual regimen. Yet self-culture, I believe, was indeed a religious practice that required dedication and resulted in transcendence, much like any other. The exercises that they engaged in are quite simple and common: walking, musing, reading, conversing, and they are mostly free and can be performed at any time by anyone. But as a spiritual practice, they are not necessarily easy. As Frederick Hedge, another of the original members of the Transcendental Club, wrote in an essay on the art of life, "The work is hard and the wages are low. The only motive to engage in this work is its own inherent worth. Much that other men esteem as highest and follow after as a grand reality, he will have to forego. No emoluments must seduce him from the rigor of his devotion. No engagements beyond the merest necessities of life must interfere with his pursuit. A meager economy must be his income." Emerson said that none of the Transcendentalists lived a purely spiritual life, but they were harbingers and forerunners. They were ministers and morally instructive writers, calling their audiences to embrace a new and different way of life. Though I can't claim to have lived a purely spiritual life myself, I continue to find insight and inspiration in their example and their teachings. They have guided my ministry, my writing, and my outlook on life. In this book, I have sought to retrieve their message and reclaim its value for spiritual seekers today. Thank you so much.
And we're ending today with another hymn by Samuel Longfellow. It's number 345, "With Joy We Claim the Growing Light." Please stand as you're willing and able, and Michelina will play it through.
Lord,
Our benediction today is from Reverend Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. Amen. Blessed be. Salam aleikum and shalom.
Shalom.